The first time you see it, you don't believe it's a fighter. It's a behemoth, a jug, as the veterans call it. 7 tons of American industrial might wrapped around the largest engine you've ever seen. Back in training, they taught you about elegant dogfights, about turning and climbing. This machine feels like it can do neither. The Germans have already given it a nickname, the Fat Little Friend. But as you strap in and feel the cockpit shake from the raw power of its engine, you realize this isn't about grace. It's about force, and you are the one chosen to unleash it. The machine was the brainchild of a Georgian immigrant, a visionary named Alexander Kartveli. He was Republic Aviation's chief designer, a man who understood that the skies over Europe were not a tournament for gentlemen. They were a brutal, unforgiving arena where survival was paramount. While others sought to build the perfect fencer's foil, light, nimble, and deadly in a duel, Kartveli was forging a battle axe. He built his aircraft around the most powerful piston engine of the era, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. This 18-cylinder radial engine was a monster, a 2,000-horsepower heart for his armored beast. But raw power alone wasn't the answer. The American strategic bombing campaign depended on daylight precision raids, sending formations of B-17s and B-24s deep into Germany. Up in the thin, frigid air above 25,000 feet, conventional fighter engines gasped for oxygen, losing power and leaving the bombers vulnerable. Kartveli's solution was an engineering marvel, a complex turbo-supercharger system. It was a mechanical lung, forcing compressed air into the engine, allowing the Thunderbolt to breathe and fight where others could not. Its intricate ductwork ran the length of the fuselage, giving the P-47 its signature deep-bellied profile. This wasn't just an addition, it was the core of the plane's entire design philosophy. The Thunderbolt was born to dominate the high-altitude frontier. On April 8, 1943, the Juggernaut went to war. Flying their first combat sweep, the pilots of the 56th and 78th Fighter Groups were cautious, unsure of their new mounts. Across the channel, the Luftwaffe watched. To seasoned German aces like Joseph Priller, the P-47 was a joke. It was twice the weight of their own lethal Focke-Wulf 190. They watched it struggle to climb, saw its ponderous turns, and concluded it was a flying target, an easy kill for their battle-hardened veterans. And in those initial weeks, they were proven right. American pilots, trained in the art of the turning dogfight, tried to maneuver the 7-ton Thunderbolt like a lightweight Spitfire. They engaged the German fighters on their own terms, entering a deadly dance for which their partner was ill-suited. They tried to outturn the Bf-109 and outroll the FW-190. The results were disastrous. The jug was being bled, and morale was sinking. The laughter in the German mess halls grew louder. The machine was a failure, a testament to American ignorance of aerial combat. But the Germans, and even some of the Allied pilots, were failing to understand what Kartveli had built. They were judging the battle axe on its inability to fence. They had not yet seen what would happen when it was allowed to fall. The answer didn't come from a change in the machine, but from a revolution in the minds of the men who flew it. The architect of this change was a commander named Hubert "Hub" Zemke, leader of the 56th Fighter Group. Zemke was a pragmatist, an engineer by training, who saw the problem not as a flawed aircraft, but as a flawed doctrine. He and his pilots, known as Zemke's Wolfpack, dissected their failures, and analyzed their machine's unique characteristics. They realized they had been trying to force a draft horse to run a thoroughbred's race. The Thunderbolt could not outturn a Focke-Wulf, but it could outdive anything in the sky. Its greatest perceived weakness, its immense weight, was about to become its most terrifying weapon. Thus, the doctrine of boom and zoom was perfected. The strategy was brutally simple and devastatingly effective. P-47 groups would climb high above the fight, sometimes thousands of feet above their German adversaries, using their turbo-supercharged engines to claim the ceiling of the sky. They became patient predators, circling in the thin, cold air, using the sun and clouds as camouflage. When a target was spotted below, the pilots would nose their 7-ton juggernauts over into a steep dive. What happened next defied the conventional laws of aerial combat. Gravity took hold. The P-47, with its clean aerodynamic lines and immense mass, accelerated to speeds the lighter German fighters could only dream of. They plunged downwards at over 500 miles per hour, the airframe screaming under the strain. For the German pilot below, it was an attack that came from nowhere. One moment the sky was clear, the next, a rapidly growing shape was hurtling towards them, too fast to track, too fast to evade. The Thunderbolt pilot had a precious few seconds in this high-speed pass. There was no time for a prolonged duel. Instead, they brought to bear the second part of Kartvelli's design philosophy: overwhelming firepower. The Thunderbolt carried 8 ANM-2 .50 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. In a 1-second burst, this arsenal could unleash over 100 heavy caliber, armor-piercing incendiary rounds. It wasn't a stream of bullets. It was a solid wall of flying metal that could shred a Messerschmitt's airframe and ignite its fuel tanks in an instant. After this devastating pass, the P-47 pilot would not turn to fight. They would use the incredible kinetic energy built up in the dive to perform the final step, the zoom. They would pull up and convert their speed back into altitude, climbing away faster than any pursuer could follow, resetting the engagement on their own terms. The hunter was back in the safety of the high altitude, ready to strike again. The fat little friend was no longer a joke. It was a sledgehammer from the heavens. The theory of the Thunderbolt's power was one thing. Proving it under fire was another. That proof would be delivered not in a grand fleet action, but in the desperate solo struggle of a single pilot. On June 26, 1943, Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson was flying escort when his formation was ambushed. In the swirling chaos of the dogfight, Johnson became separated, finding himself alone and deep in enemy territory. That was when a German Focke-Wulf 190 appeared on his tail. The first burst of cannon fire was devastating. It felt less like bullets and more like a hammer striking an anvil. Johnson's canopy shattered, blasting him with shards of plexiglass and the freezing 60 below zero wind of high altitude. His world dissolved into a maelstrom of noise and violence. More German fighters joined the attack, a pack of wolves descending on a wounded bull. They circled him, taking turns to pour fire into his aircraft. Johnson's instrument panel disintegrated. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across his legs, and the smell of cordite filled the cockpit. The controls went slack in his hands as shells severed the cables. His P-47 was being systematically dismantled around him, piece by piece. According to every known principle of aviation, his aircraft should have broken apart or exploded, but the Jug refused to die. Alexander Kartvelli had built it with a structural integrity that bordered on the absurd. It soaked up the punishment, absorbing hundreds of machine gun rounds and, as was later counted, over 20 20-millimeter cannon shells. Any other fighter would have been a cloud of debris, but the Thunderbolt held together. Wounded and half-blinded, Johnson realized his attackers had made a critical error. They were so confident in their kill that they grew careless, breaking formation to get a better angle. In that fleeting moment, Johnson saw his only chance. He did the one thing the P-47 did better than any other plane. He dived. He pushed the stick forward, and the battered behemoth responded, plunging towards the earth. The German pilots watched in disbelief as the sieve-like airframe accelerated away from them, leaving them behind in its wake. Johnson managed to level out just above the waves of the English Channel and limp his ravaged aircraft back to base. When he landed, the ground crew stood in stunned silence. The plane was a wreck, a testament to extreme violence. It was missing entire sections of its tail, its wings were perforated like cheesecloth, and its engine was barely holding on. Robert S. Johnson had not only survived, he had brought the evidence home with him. His ordeal was a revelation. It proved beyond any doubt that the P-47 could take an unbelievable amount of punishment and still bring its pilot home. For the pilots in the briefing rooms, it was a profound psychological boost. For German intelligence, it was a terrifying wake-up call. The fat little friend was not just a sledgehammer, it was an anvil, capable of absorbing blows that would shatter anything else. With its tactics proven and its durability established, the P-47's role in the strategic air war began to crystallize. The summer of 1943 saw the 8th Air Force escalate its daylight bombing campaign, targeting the industrial heart of the Third Reich. On August 17, this strategy culminated in one of the most infamous missions of the war, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. The objective was to strike a double blow against Germany's ball-bearing and aircraft production. Hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses would fly unescorted for a significant portion of their journey deep into the lion's den. The P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group, led by Hub Zemke, were tasked with the impossible: protect the bombers as far as their fuel would allow, then turn back, leaving the heavy bombers to fend for themselves against the full fury of the Luftwaffe. From the moment they crossed the enemy coast, the sky became a sprawling, three-dimensional battlefield. The German response was overwhelming and expertly coordinated. Wave after wave of Messerschmitt, Bf-109s, and Focke-Wulf 190s rose to meet them. They attacked the bomber formations with a ferocity the Americans had never before witnessed. Amidst this chaos, the Thunderbolt pilots flew a desperate screen. They engaged in frantic, high-altitude battles, executing their boom and zoom tactics with deadly precision. They broke up enemy fighter formations, forcing them to jettison their auxiliary fuel tanks and abort their attacks. Men like Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, who would go on to become the top American ace in Europe, honed their skills in these brutal melees, their 850 caliber guns tearing into the German interceptors. But the inexorable logic of geography and fuel consumption could not be denied. As the bombers droned deeper into Germany, the P-47s reached their limit. One by one, flight leaders signaled their departure, waggling their wings in a grim farewell before turning for home. The bomber crews watched them go with a sense of dread, knowing their guardian angels were leaving them to face the worst of the fight alone. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission was a Pyrrhic victory. While the targets were hit, the cost was staggering. 60 heavy bombers were lost, a loss rate that was utterly unsustainable. The raid laid bare the brutal truth of the air war. Unescorted daylight bombing was suicide. It proved that even with the best tactics, the Thunderbolt simply did not have the range to fulfill the deep escort role the Allies desperately needed. A new solution was required. But as the P-47's limitations in one role were exposed, a new chapter in its operational history was about to begin. The designers at Republic Aviation were already at work on an upgrade that would not just improve the aircraft, but fundamentally transform its capabilities and its destiny over the battlefields of Europe. The problem of the Thunderbolt's performance wasn't just about range, it was about energy. While its dive was unmatched, its climb rate was still a point of concern. In the vertical fight, where pilots converted speed into altitude, the P-47 struggled against its lighter opponents. The solution arrived in early 1944, and it was deceptively simple: a new propeller. The introduction of the paddle blade propeller, specifically a large Hamilton Standard Hydromatic, was a game changer. These new blades were wider and shaped more like a paddle, allowing them to bite into the air with far greater efficiency. The effect on the P-47's performance was not incremental, it was transformative. Suddenly, the climb rate improved dramatically. The aircraft's acceleration, once a weakness, became a strength. The Thunderbolt could now hold its own in a climbing fight, using the immense power of its R-2800 engine more effectively than ever before. This upgrade, combined with the gradual introduction of water injection for emergency power, created a more agile and responsive fighting machine. It was this refined P-47D model that would form the backbone of the American fighter force in the crucial months leading up to the invasion of Europe. However, even as the Thunderbolt was reaching its zenith, as a high-altitude fighter, another legendary aircraft was arriving in theater: the North American P-51 Mustang. With its revolutionary laminar flow wing and Merlin engine, the Mustang possessed the one thing the Thunderbolt never could: extreme range. It could fly all the way to Berlin and back, sticking to the bombers like glue from takeoff to landing. The strategic calculus of the air war shifted. The 8th Air Force now had its long-legged guardian. The P-51 was assigned the primary role of deep penetration escort, taking the fight to the Luftwaffe over its own capital. This could have spelled the end of the P-47's combat career, relegating it to a secondary role. Instead, it was a liberation. Freed from the constraints of high-altitude escort, the Thunderbolt and its pilots were unleashed to perform the mission for which the aircraft's rugged design was uniquely suited: ground attack. The Thunderbolt became a Jabo, a jagged bomber. It was a fighter bomber of unparalleled destructive power. It could carry a bomb load of 2,500 pounds, the same as the B-26 Marauder medium bomber of a few years prior. It could be armed with high-velocity air-to-ground rockets that could tear apart tanks and concrete bunkers. And even with a full load of ordnance, it still carried its 8 50-caliber machine guns, ready to defend itself against any airborne threat or to strafe targets of opportunity with withering fire. As the calendar turned towards June of 1944, thousands of these upgunned, battle-hardened Thunderbolts were massed on airfields across southern England. Their new mission was not to protect the bombers, but to pave the way for the soldiers. They were about to become the steel-tipped spear of the Allied invasion. Part fished, awaiting confirmation. On June 6, 1944, as Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, the skies above were owned by the P-47 Thunderbolt. D-Day and the subsequent battle for France marked the aircraft's glorious second act. From dawn till dusk, squadrons of jabos roamed the French countryside in a relentless campaign of interdiction. Their mission was to isolate the battlefield, to ensure that German reinforcements, panzer divisions, infantry columns, and supply convoys never reached the front lines. The pilots flew at treetop level, a dangerous and nerve-wracking altitude where the world rushed by in a blur of green and brown. This was a far cry from the sterile, high-altitude duels over Germany. Here, every tree could hide a machine gun nest, every church steeple an observation post. The threat of flak was constant and deadly. But it was in this brutal, low-level environment that the Thunderbolt's inherent toughness became its most vital asset. The same qualities that allowed Robert S. Johnson to survive his ordeal now saved countless pilots from anti-aircraft fire. The massive radial engine could absorb hits that would cripple a liquid-cooled engine like the Mustang's Merlin. The sturdy airframe could return to base riddled with holes, a testament to Kartvel's philosophy of survival. The impact on the German war machine was catastrophic. A German tank commander's report from the period paints a vivid picture of helplessness. "We are being hunted like rats in the open field." A panzer division attempting to move to the front during daylight was a suicide mission. Thunderbolt pilots became masters of destruction, using rockets to crack the armor of Panther and Tiger tanks. They would strafe supply trucks until they burst into flames, creating impassable roadblocks on the narrow French roads. They cut railway lines, blew up bridges, and strafed airfields, effectively paralyzing the German army's ability to respond to the invasion. The sheer psychological terror they inflicted was immeasurable. The distinctive roar of the double Wasp engine became a harbinger of doom for German soldiers. When the sound of the jug was heard, they dove for cover, knowing that a storm of rockets and 50-caliber rounds was about to be unleashed. Men like Gabby Gabreski, already an ace, added to their scores by destroying enemy aircraft on the ground before they even had a chance to take off. The Thunderbolt was no longer just a fighter. It was an airborne artillery piece, a tank buster, and the iron fist of tactical air power. It was systematically dismantling the Wehrmacht from the air, one convoy and one tank at a time, ensuring that the Allied foothold in Normandy would become an unstoppable breakout. As the Allies pushed deeper into France and towards the German border in late 1944, the nature of the Thunderbolt's success began to reveal a deeper, more profound truth about the war. The victory of the P-47 was not just a story of a single machine or a superior tactic. It was the story of an industrial philosophy. While Germany had produced some of the most technologically advanced and brilliantly engineered aircraft of the war, like the Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter, they could not produce them in sufficient numbers. The German war economy was a marvel of technical innovation, but a victim of complexity and scarcity. America, in contrast, built for abundance. Republic Aviation's factory in Farmingdale, New York, was a monument to this principle. It was a sprawling assembly line that churned out Thunderbolts with breathtaking efficiency. The design, while sophisticated in its turbo supercharger, was fundamentally robust and built for mass production. By the end of the war, over 15,000 P-47s would be built, a staggering number that the German industrial base could never hope to match. This industrial might created a war of attrition that the Luftwaffe was mathematically destined to lose. For every expert German pilot lost, there was often no replacement of equal skill. For every complex Focke-Wulf 190 destroyed, the intricate supply chain for its replacement parts was already strained to the breaking point. The Allies, on the other hand, had a seemingly endless river of resources. A P-47 lost in combat, while a tragedy for the pilot and his squadron was a statistically insignificant event for the war effort. Another Jug, fresh from the factory, was already on a ship crossing the Atlantic. More importantly, America was producing an ocean of well-trained, well-fed, and confident pilots to fly them. This attritional reality was on full display during the last desperate gamble of the Luftwaffe, Operation Bodenplatte, on January 1, 1945. In a surprise attack, hundreds of German fighters struck Allied airfields across the Low Countries, hoping to wipe out the tactical air forces on the ground. They achieved stunning initial success, destroying numerous aircraft. But the blow was not fatal. The Allies could absorb the losses, replace the aircraft within weeks, and continue the fight. The Luftwaffe, however, paid a catastrophic price. They lost over 200 pilots, many of them irreplaceable veterans, in a single day. The operation was a death blow from which the German fighter arm would never recover. The Thunderbolt had not just won individual dogfights. It had become the instrument of an overwhelming industrial strategy that ground the enemy into dust through sheer, relentless pressure. Even as the war in Europe ground to its inevitable conclusion, the Thunderbolt story was not over. A new, far larger conflict was raging across the vast expanses of the Pacific. Here, the requirements for a fighter were different. The enemy was the Japanese, and the battlefield was a seemingly endless ocean dotted with tiny island airstrips. Range was not just a tactical advantage. It was a matter of life and death. Pilots flying from one island to another had no friendly territory to limp home to if their aircraft was damaged or ran low on fuel. There was only the unforgiving blue of the Pacific. To meet this challenge, Republic Aviation developed the ultimate evolution of the Jug, the P-47N. This was the Thunderbolt reimagined for the long-haul fight. Engineers redesigned the wing, adding a new squared-off wingtip section that housed additional fuel tanks. This, combined with a host of other refinements, dramatically extended the aircraft's combat radius. The P-47N could fly missions lasting over 8 hours, covering distances that would have been unthinkable for the earlier models that first flew over Europe. Deployed in the final year of the war, these long-range Thunderbolts played a critical role in the island-hopping campaign and the final assault on the Japanese home islands. Flying from newly captured bases on Iwo Jima and Okinawa, they escorted the massive B-29 Superfortress bombers on their devastating raids against Japan. They were very long-range escorts, clearing the skies of Japanese interceptors and allowing the superfortresses to deliver their payloads with greater impunity. In this theater, the Thunderbolt's reputation for toughness once again proved its worth. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 was an air-cooled radial engine, making it inherently more resilient to battle damage than the liquid-cooled engines common in many other fighters. A single bullet puncturing a coolant line could cause a liquid-cooled engine to seize up in minutes, a death sentence over the Pacific. The Thunderbolt's air-cooled cylinders could often sustain multiple hits and continue to function, a crucial advantage that brought many pilots home who would have otherwise been lost to the sea. From the skies over industrial Germany to the vast oceanic battleground of the Pacific, the P-47 had proven its incredible versatility. It had evolved from a misunderstood high-altitude interceptor to a feared tank buster, and finally to a long-range oceanic guardian. It was a testament to the genius of its initial design, a design so robust and adaptable that it could be modified to meet and master every challenge the global conflict threw at it. The laughter of the Luftwaffe pilots back in 1943 now seemed like a distant, hollow echo from another era. The legacy of the Republic, P-47. Thunderbolt is a story of profound transformation. It entered the war as an object of ridicule, a clumsy giant in a sky filled with graceful predators. But war is not a contest of aesthetics. It is a brutal equation of power, resilience, and adaptability. The Thunderbolt solved that equation. It was never as elegant as a Spitfire, nor did it possess the legendary range of the P-51 Mustang. The Mustang, rightly, earned its fame as the Cadillac of the skies, the thoroughbred that broke the heart of the Luftwaffe in deep escort missions. But if the Mustang was the rapier, the Thunderbolt was the warhammer. It was the aircraft that did the grimy, essential work of breaking armies. The numbers alone tell a staggering story of its impact. P-47 pilots were credited with destroying thousands of enemy aircraft, both in the air and on the ground. But the statistics that truly define its contribution are the ones tallied on the earth. Hundreds of thousands of trucks, thousands of locomotives and rolling stock, and thousands of armored vehicles. It was the machine that bled the German army dry long before it could ever reach the battlefield. Men like Hub Zemke and his wolf pack didn't just fly an aircraft. They invented a new way of fighting with it. Pilots like Robert S. Johnson proved its almost supernatural ability to survive, giving confidence to every man who strapped into its cockpit. Aces like Gabby Gabreski demonstrated its lethality, mastering its unique strengths to become legends. In the end, the Thunderbolt's greatest triumph was as a symbol of the American way of war. It was born from the mind of Alexander Kartveli, an immigrant who envisioned a machine that would protect its pilot above all else. It was built by the thousands in factories that represented the unstoppable engine of American industry. And it was flown by pilots who, through ingenuity and courage, turned its perceived flaws into unstoppable strengths. The laughter of 1943 faded into a grim silence, replaced by the grudging respect of its enemies. Even the German general of fighters, Adolf Galland, acknowledged the devastating effectiveness of the Jabo. The fat little friend had become their worst nightmare. It was not just a fighter. It was a juggernaut, a rugged, dependable, and overwhelmingly powerful instrument of war that hammered its way across the skies of Europe and the Pacific, clearing the path to victory.